Our parents and grandparents went through the 30s, and they were determined it weren't going to happen again. They went through the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, particularly the 3 or 4 million that came out of the forces, they come back to Britain and say, we ain't having massive employment like where they were in the 30s. We ain't having a situation where people haven't got a house. We ain't having a situation where you've got to borrow or sell stuff before the doctor will come and see you, where your kids can't get an education. We want a free health service. We want a free education. We want a national house building programme. We want a guarantee of training and employment. We want the changes. I've not gone as far as some of us would have wished they'd gone in the 1940s, but they built a national health service. They built a national education. They had a house building programme. The combination of all that was, in the 50s and the 60s, if you look at a year's production of wealth in this country, the amount that went into wages, and in addition to that, the social wage, the things that are spent on the things that we need, education, health and so on, got up to about 60-70% of the economy. Wages alone for working people were 58% of the whole wealth of this country in 1978. Along came Caledon, especially Thatcher and Major, not challenged by Blair, continued by Brown, continued by Cameron. And in 2011, they'd taken 5% to 53% of the wealth that's created in a year in this country, which used to go to wages. That 5% now extra goes to the rich. That, in 2011, in 1 year, was £60 billion. Over 73 to 2011, it's £1.3 trillion, coincidentally. The predictions of what the whole of the 2008 recession and crash was going to cost us all was 1.3 trillion pounds. But it's a process over the last 20 or 30 years where the rich have been trying to rebalance the money for ordinary people in this country towards what goes to those 2.9 million millionaires who are at the top of society and whom the big parties run society. And these cuts in local services, the cuts in the health service, the fragmentation of the education service to allow profit making to come into health and education is an acceleration of what Thatcher and Blair did in the 80s and the 90s. And what we need, and the point I want to finish on, is to reverse that trend, is we need to build an organisation that can actually challenge those things taking place. Now, clearly when it comes to day-to-day stuff in the council, we need industrial resistance from council and other public sector workers. And we're getting that, obviously, on the issue of pensions, with the strikes and demonstrations that took place last year, the big one on November the 30th. The next one planned is the 28th of March. We need to support campaigns like FOSL, like Sure Start, like Corley, where individual groups of parents or communities are saying, look, we're not going to let you take away the service that we and our families rely on. The trouble we face, though, is that the big three unions in the council, Unison, Unite and the GMP, are so entwined with the Labour Party nationally, that certainly nationally and to a large extent locally, it affects the way in which resistance takes place. How else do you explain that on Tuesday, when the cuts were taking place, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there was 12 people from the unions that were demonstrating against those cuts. If there was just in double figures, it was. But it was people who regretfully had to go straight off to another meeting, didn't even come into the council chamber to see how the debate went on. Now, back in the 1980s, there were battles against Thatcher and the cuts. There we had 20 Labour councillors in 1983 who refused to carry out the cuts and set up a legal and political challenge against the government of the day. At the end of a 2 or 3 year battle, regretfully, there was only 2 of them left, Liverpool and Lambeth. We could go through, perhaps through contributions, through the details of those battles, but the point was there were cities that said no. There were hundreds of councillors and tens and hundreds of thousands of union activists in those cities who refused to carry out what the government was doing and engaged in battle. This time round, there's not 20 Labour councils that are refusing to carry out the cuts. There's not 20 Labour councillors on Labour authorities that refuse to carry out the cuts. There's one councillor in Barking, George Barrett, who's resigned from the Labour Party. rather than carry out the cuts. There's one councillor in Lambeth, Kingsley Abram, who abstained, which means he didn't vote for or against, in a private pre-meeting to the council, organised Labour councillors, and said, I can't go in that chamber and support your cuts. And he was suspended from the Labour Party for doing that. Now, as an aside, it happens, as he's a member of Unite, and the left within Unite got a bit upset about it, the Unite organisation in London has come down with a ton of bricks on this bloke. It's led on paper to Unite having a more radical opposition to the cuts than it had 6 or 9 months ago. Officially on paper, Unite as a union will support any councillor who opposes the cuts in any authority. But so far, there's one in Barking resigned, there's one in Lambeth that's abstained in a pre-group private meeting, and I understand, by accident, on Tuesday at lunchtime, somebody who was attending a meeting at Severn Trent came over and introduced himself to me as a Labour councillor from authority in Nottinghamshire. There's 2 Labour councillors on an authority in Nottinghamshire who intend in the next couple of weeks to vote against the cuts. But if you think 4 people out of about 300 or 400 councils, where there are about 10,000 councillors, where there's about 1 million council workers in unions, and you can see that there isn't, from the big 3 unions or the Labour Party, any prospect in the short term of resistance taking place. So alongside still arguing where we can for the need for support for campaigns who are resisting, or for workers in authorities themselves to resist, we have to do something this May to make sure that there's a political alternative for people who want to vote against the cuts when they can't vote for any of the 3 parties that are carrying out the cuts. Now, clearly from our point of view as the Socialist Party, we want to do that by hoping anybody who isn't a member of the Socialist Party will think about joining us, because we're the most active and most consistent when it comes to supporting campaigns and fighting against the cuts in the city. But we don't just rely on ourselves, we work closely with others. And a couple of years ago we started a coalition of trade unionists and socialists who wanted to fight against the cuts. And in the general election we were able to stand in 25 of the biggest cities in candidates for Parliament, getting very modest results, 1, 2, 3% and so on. Last year we stood about 180 candidates in council elections. There we were getting a few in the 10 to 15, 20%, but again mainly fairly small. This year we want to extend that and stand in a lot more places, hopefully get a few hundred anti-cuts candidates, either directly from ourselves or from those involved in the coalition, or from any campaign that wishes to put the main parties to the test by embarrassing them by standing a community candidate against cuts. And where we will this time, we think, get the highest profile is that we've put together at last a serious coalition in London, the London Assembly. Now you'll know in London they've already got an elected there. It's Boris Johnson at the moment, Ken Nellist is challenging for him from Labour. But they have an assembly across the whole of London, and it's elected by a form of proportional representation. So unlike me, when I'm standing again this May in St Michael's, I've got to get about 48% of the vote to get elected. If you get over 5% in this assembly election in London, across the whole of London, which is about 150,000 votes, you can get the last place of this ladder of proportional representation. And we've put together a list now in London with the national president of the railway workers, the RMT, as the lead candidate, with the regional secretary of the Fire Brigades Union as a candidate, with the regional organiser of the RMT in London as a candidate, with the National Executive Committee member for London of the Teachers Union, the NUT, as a candidate, the regional secretary of the College Workers Union, the UCU, as a candidate, the National Executive Committee member from Unison, and several others. I think the Postal Workers is talking as well, the CWU, about putting somebody forward. And it'll be the biggest independent, albeit small unions, that's significant, because the railway workers were the ones who 100 years ago founded the Labour Party. It was their money and their inspiration that got Labour going in 12 years ago, that founded the Labour Party. And for them to be the core of the first independent union challenge of this calibre against all the main parties is historically significant. And I think in London we stand every chance of crawling over that threshold and getting somebody who'll argue against cuts, in a sense like I've tried to do on the council in recent years, on a national stage in London. And that's, in essence, what we need to put forward as a programme to fight the cuts. There has to be resistance. Simply saying no would be a good start, and I can't find a single Labour councillor who will do that in Coventry. So if we can't find anybody in the established parties, we have to find people in the 18 wards in Coventry to stand against all of them, to embarrass them against what they're trying to do. But more than that, we have to build both the ranks of the core of this project, which is the Socialist Party, and those who want to be involved generally in the challenge against the big parties, so this body TUSK, the Trade Unions and Socialist Coalition. We've already got a few thousand people connected to it, through emails and stuff like that. And to put before people that there can be an alternative. In the short term, there's enough money in the coffers of Coventry and the reserves, they could buy some time to get the communities fighting like they did do in Lambeth and Liverpool in the 1980s, in blaming the Tories down in London, who are the villains in this piece. And if they don't do that, Labour, in standing between communities and the Tories, will get their share of the blame by carrying out the cuts. But there is the possibility of deflecting those cuts by using reserves to mount a campaign. Overall, it's the overlapping agenda of the big three parties that we as working class people and our families have to pay the price for the gambling and speculation of the bankers. If that agenda is to be challenged, we have to go back to some of the ideas that founded the trade unions and the labour movement over 100 years ago, which is that public ownership of key utilities and industries, of gas, of water, of transport, of electricity, the things that have been stolen from us, and the things they're trying to take away from us at the moment in education and in health. We need the sort of mass party that can reflect the needs of defending those services for working people, and that's something that through and beyond these local elections we have to build. And any of that's at all of interest to you, then think about getting involved with us. Best still join us in the Socialist Party and help us build that sort of radical alternative. Thanks for listening.